Thanks for having us. So for this panel session, it's called Evolving Shared Digital Infrastructure Opportunities and Economies of Scale. And we have 20 minutes. And basically, I'm just going to interview Victoria. So Victoria, thanks for doing this. I guess just to start, can you provide a quick overview of ZenFi and what you're predominantly doing in your role as Chief Revenue Officer? And as part of that, how the company's service offering has really evolved over the last many years. I think that's a big part of what we're trying to get at during this fireside chat.
Sure. Well, first of all, Colby, thank you so much. Great to see you, even virtually. And obviously, thank you for NEDAS. It's been a great couple days of content. Wish we were all in person, but I do have to say I enjoy being able to go back and look at the panels. So appreciate you putting this on, Alyssa, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Victoria Lamberth, Chief Revenue Officer and one of the founders of ZenFi Networks. ZenFi is a digital infrastructure provider of fiber optic networks, wireless siting, and network edge co-location. We started the business in 2014, and at that time, our core team was made up of industry veterans who had previously built fiber optic networks and a group who had previously built some of the first outdoor DAS and small cell networks in New York City. And so when we came to this stage about 7 years ago, we came with this unique perspective in our area, which was we saw the wireless companies coming to town. We saw they were gobbling up fiber networks. We saw that the traditional fiber providers really didn't understand how these network architectures were being created. And so when we founded the business, we founded it on a focus of enabling, at the time, 4G networks, so the densification of the network. And we ultimately saw this evolution to ultra-dense networks. Excuse me. So when I think about the evolution of ZenFi and where we started with this vision, and the vision was to take what we had seen in the wireless world of the vertical tower, and we thought that we could turn it on its side and create a horizontal tower in a dense urban environment like New York City. And we saw there was a necessity to do this because of the cost of deploying in an area like New York and because of the congestion. And so we created this vision where we said, all right, instead of doing the old model where you create these high capacity networks, but for sparse networking enterprise applications, we're going to create a network of neighborhood networks. We're going to take that ground space of the tower. We're going to put it in what we now call network edge colos, but at the time it was within traditional data centers. We're going to take that, the steel that goes in the air of the tower. That's going to be our front haul fiber network, and we're going to have to find a way to make that accessible. And those rad centers in the sky, well, those are our vertical stubs. Those are our pole tops, our sides of building, our smart street furniture. And when we initially came to market, I would say that there wasn't this same level of buy-in for the benefits of convergence that we see today. And I think part of that was because, there just hadn't been a need at that time. There weren't that many networks that were needing these dense applications, as we were seeing in New York. And part of it was just because we hadn't brought these multiple industries together. So, beginning of the focus was on, solving that front haul fiber architecture. As the years went on, we evolved from leasing our own data center space to building out our own colo facilities. The requirements from the carriers had shifted from, wanting their radios within 20 optical miles of the baseband processing to 10. So we found a need to build these network edge colos out. And I would say in the past year, we've had a real focus on working with the carriers, working with municipalities on developing new wireless siting opportunities that are both multi-tenant and multi-service. And now as we look forward, now that we have our infrastructure in place, we're starting to look at ways to expand our product offering into shared spectrum and radio assets and the like. But I'm sure we'll get into all of that.
So it's really interesting. I mean, you've gone in the last 7 years from selling a product or a standalone service, which is really fiber, but meant for mobile carriers for the most part, to one now where you're selling an evolving solution set. And that includes, various components, including, I guess, the co-location space, as well as, what you could actually do on the small cell. So I guess with that said, so small cells and the use of a CRAN architecture has helped companies like ZenFi evolve from selling fiber to more of a solution to your customers. But it seems like the next step in this evolution is the use of virtualized infrastructure. And you kind of hinted at that a little bit as well. Can you talk about what's meant by virtualized infrastructure and where we're on in that process or in that journey?
Sure. And the first thing I'll say is your first comment in the beginning of that question is spot on. The reason we've seen convergence in this sector is because of the CRAN architecture. It was necessary to move that processing away from the co-location of the radio back into the network to save costs. That CRAN originally is for centralized, RAN, but eventually cloudified, right? Sharing processing dynamically across the network. And so there was a real push and need to provide for providers like us to provide these turnkey solutions to the carriers, right? So the byproduct of that is we've now built an infrastructure where we have, the heart of the network again is a colo facility. You've got your carriers all in there, high capacity, redundant power, hardened telco facility. You have your front haul network reaching out and touching sites, and you have wireless sites deployed, and you have these deployed for carriers today for them to utilize their proprietary spectrum. However, there's now an opportunity, and you're seeing this come down from the FCC, of opening up more spectrum to be made available for providers like us and others outside of the traditional carriers. And what that's going to allow for is the placement of neutral radios on these wireless stubs. And instead of selling, right now I have basically three main, customer targets that I'm trying to sell to, and we're selling that turnkey solution. But once I have a neutral radio, all of a sudden I can provide solutions to virtual network operators. I can provide solutions to the traditional carriers from an offload perspective. I can provide solutions to municipalities or large enterprises who are looking to build out their own private networking applications. So it's really an explosion of opportunity. And I would say we often hear at conferences and events the question, where are we with the 5G rollout, right? You always hear that, and we always hear the response. It's always done in a baseball analogy. Oh, we're in the first couple of innings, maybe 3, maybe 4, whatever it is. Well, when we talk about virtual infrastructure, we are just starting the game, and I think that is exciting for our industry, because this is the next frontier for all of us infrastructure providers, and it comes back to what allowed us to get here. What allowed us to get here was the CRAN architecture that created this converged architecture for many of us to play in, to build physical assets for others to share. And now that we have those physical assets in place, the natural evolution is to allow the sharing of spectrum. So when we talk about virtual infrastructure, we're talking about shared spectrum as the overlay on top of the physical network.
Okay, so a bunch of things here. So first off, CRAN is really it's an architecture, and then a VRAN or ultimately ORAN is the virtualization of that architecture to enable services. And you're talking about neutral host radios as that solution. Is that happening now? I mean, are you seeing others, perhaps competitors in other markets in the United States? Is this something that we're already seeing starting to roll out?
Yeah, we are already starting to see it roll out. We have not yet rolled out our product offering in New York City. We are still in the process of developing that product, but we are testing it. But we're seeing it roll out in other areas, and we're seeing it roll out for really interesting applications. We've got outdoor CBRS private networks that are enabling school systems in this virtual environment, connecting their teachers and students in suburban and more rural areas, working hand in hand with the municipalities and school districts to provide setting opportunities and having an underlying infrastructure provider provide that radio service. We are seeing this virtual network architecture already being deployed on traditional Wi-Fi offload. So this concept, Colby, isn't new, right? Like we have virtual network operators today that purchase roaming agreements across existing networks. We have the mobile operators do offload across wireless Wi-Fi networks today. What's different now and what will be different about the future is the quality and class of service that can be provided on something like a CBRS network or a Wi-Fi 6 network is going to make these networks now at a level of sophistication that previously we couldn't deliver. And that's what's so exciting. And I think that's where, when I say we're in the beginning innings, we're going to have to see, CBRS is a test case. How does the spectrum sharing work? How much access do you have? If you're operating within the GAA in a specific area, is that good enough? It may be in some areas of the country, in other parts of the country, you may need your PAL. So I think that we see a lot of opportunity for companies to invest in this space, and we think that it's only natural that the first entrance will be the neutral host, because they already have the assets in place today. Placing an additional radio is not a major uplift if you already have your power, fiber, and wireless site available.
So for obviously perfectly then for a company like ZenFi, to in some cases be your own customer, I suppose, on some of those small cells, and to use your own data center for your own physical infrastructure, and from that perspective, actually save the CapEx requirement, whether it's for the carriers or it's for others who would want to potentially use these services. Before we talk a little bit more about some of the use cases, and you mentioned in the school system, I think Crown Castle is doing that in the LA district, if I'm not mistaken. You talked about using CBRS, unlicensed spectrum. You talked about Wi-Fi 6. Is that what was the inflection point here? Was it when this unlicensed spectrum became available? And I think that FCC is expecting to auction off the 3.45, which I think is also going to have some version of that. Is that what's making now the time when we're starting to see this?
Yeah, I think we have this perfect crossroads, right, where you have a lot of infrastructure that's been built out to support proprietary networks, mobile networks, and now you have the augmentation and the ability to access spectrum. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was the carriers who were, the major carriers who were gobbling up all this proprietary spectrum, right? And now you have an opportunity for smaller folks like us to compete. And I think that the FCC, understands that by making the spectrum available, they're creating an ecosystem that enables competition, right? And I think that they are going to continue moving in this path to try to find ways to open up spectrum, to make it available so neutral providers can provide that service. And look, the concept of sharing assets makes sense, right? Making an efficient use of capital, and efficient use of our, physical resources, use of space in areas where there isn't access to a lot of space. So the same concepts still apply on, in the virtual realm. And I think that the fact of the matter, all of us would agree that there's going to be the continual explosion of data driven on the network. There's going to be continued capacity drain on the carrier networks. And there's always an opportunity for carriers to augment their own networks and for others to come in and provide a competitive service offering. Again, maybe it's not with all the bells and whistles that your AT&T and Verizon may have, but you may not need that, right? And so that's where this opportunity is opening up. But back to your original question, yes, the timing is now because of these auctions that are being made available and the spectrum that is being made available. We call it the democratization of spectrum, right. the ability to open up that playing field.
I think part of this too, then, and you've hit on this a little bit, is the cost benefit. I mean, there's lots of commercial buildings indoor where it's not economical to deploy a carrier-specific DAS network. Typically, I think of it as like maybe less than 1 million square foot buildings, maybe less than 500,000 square foot buildings, and there's lots of them. And it seems like if you had a neutral host provider, we'll use ZenFi as the example, there's an opportunity for those mobile carriers to roam effectively onto your network, and you could negotiate some type of roaming agreement with them to do that. And it seems like that's a way to kind of start to get better quality service indoor in a lot more places where it doesn't exist today. So I get the mobile use case, and it doesn't necessarily have to be indoors. There's lots of other places where that would make sense as well. But what are some of these other use cases that you're seeing right now? You mentioned the school system as an example, and maybe we could break it into enterprises and then municipalities. But where are you seeing other opportunities? Where does this potentially make sense? What are some of the earlier cases you think we'll see beyond just the mobile carriers using it for roaming purposes, maybe to save money?
Yeah. So obviously from mobile, we have the two flavors, right? Your traditional carriers, your AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and Dish Now, providing offload opportunities off their existing spectrum across your own private network. So that's one. The virtual network operators are probably the most natural next step. That's who we're seeing the most interest from today. And again,
companies that have the MVNOs, maybe a Google Fi, that type of thing.
A Google Fi, exactly. Even a Comcast, like the cable companies. I mean, instead of having 3 or 4 potential customers, that opens the door to tens or potentially even 100 customers. Those will be the natural first adopters. But after that, you're going to start seeing enterprises adopting as well, and you're going to start seeing use cases for private LTE, private 5G applications, which obviously you can think through some of the use cases indoor, but we mentioned some of the outdoor ones as well. When it comes to municipalities, right now, I'm not seeing them so much as a customer as an enabler, right? So eventually, these municipalities they'll likely use the wireless siting for IoT applications, leverage LoRaWAN network to deploy sensors and that sort of thing. But they don't need to. You're not going to pay to bring fiber and power and pay for a brand new greenfield site for that type of application. You're going to leverage something that's already available. So what we're seeing more of today is an increase in public-private partnerships, and we're seeing it not just within our market. We're hearing it from partners, competitors of ours in the news, and we're finding that municipalities are getting a lot more savvy about both the benefits of expanding broadband infrastructure and what they can do to incent companies like ours and the major carriers to build out infrastructures in areas that traditionally have been underserved. So there's a lot of activity with the municipalities, but it's more on this public-private partnership side. It's less of them as a customer. Yeah, as an enabler.
Maybe that's a good transition to talk a little bit about Link NYC, which is specific to NYC, to which ZenFi is involved in. Can you talk about what that is and maybe use that as an example of kind of this partnership that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a perfect example. I mean, it's one of the most innovative case studies that I certainly know about in the States. The city of New York around 2013, 2014 took a look around the city, and they had 10,000 payphones all around the city that weren't being used. Why weren't they being used? Because people had cell phones, right? So, and they were becoming a bit of an eyesore. Graffiti, trash would build up on it, and the city wanted to find a better use of those assets. And what they did was they offered a franchise, and the franchise was to replace the existing payphones with these link structures. Now, these link structures offer free public calling, free gigabit Wi-Fi, USB charging, and advertising. And the really cool thing about this project is the New York City taxpayer doesn't pay $1. In fact, they get paid for the service because a portion of the revenues from the advertising are paid to the city. The advertising is used to fulfill the build out of the underlying network. And there is a free public Wi-Fi network throughout the city to each of these sites. And the byproduct of all that is now you have areas of the city that traditionally haven't had neutral fiber infrastructure, and they haven't had an increase in data centers because they haven't been in the commercial zones, now have those. And so as that network gets built out, third parties can take advantage of it. And I think we can imagine in the future, those will be wireless siting opportunities, and that will just expand. We see this in the MTA with, Transit Wireless has a similar partnership, expanding Wi-Fi as service throughout the subways, creating this underlying architecture that eventually can be leveraged for other opportunities. And I think that the more that municipalities can get creative with the assets that they have and transforming those assets into infrastructure that can support wireless technologies today, the better for everyone, and the citizens really, really benefit from it.
Last question, because I know Alyssa is asking us to finish it up here. How much of your time then are you spending as the Chief Revenue Officer just evangelizing what's going on, just letting people know that this is an opportunity versus them already knowing, and it's just a matter of your typical blocking and tackling as a salesperson, just trying to figure out those opportunities?
I think it depends what part of the business we're talking about. When it comes to that virtual infrastructure, we're just at the beginning. We're out selling it and talking up the benefits, and we're starting to hear it at other conferences, which I think that's a good stepping stone, and I think shows that we're directionally correct, at least there. When it comes to the shared assets, that's everyone is on board there. That's not as big of a sell. The thing I spend the most time doing today is selling, not necessarily just to customers, but selling to communities and selling to our partners, because we can't sell a product to our customers, to AT&T, to Verizon, Sprint, any of these carriers, if we can't deploy a site. And what I'm finding today is everyone out there wants 5G service. Everyone out there wants the brand new, shiny, great broadband. They don't want any jitter on their Zoom calls, but people don't realize in order to get that, there's an infrastructure build that has to happen. So we spend a lot of our time talking to communities and constituents, and as a byproduct that helps us sell more to our customers.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Alyssa, thank you for the opportunity as well. And I think we're all set.
You guys were great. And Victoria, it's always a pleasure to have you on our program. I know, Ray was supposed to be here, but don't tell him I told you this, but I'm so glad that you're here instead.
Happy to be a sub-in.
No, it's so interesting what you guys are doing, right? You're in a niche market, the New York, New Jersey metro market, but that also gives you an opportunity to really focus on how to solve those problems in that market. It gives you that flexibility to really understand the nuances that's needed and kind of redefine how you design and deploy and then manage that infrastructure more effectively. And it becomes, in many ways, a spotlight that can be replicated in other dense markets, as well as be deployed in even emerging markets and secondary markets that, as you're optimizing here in the New York, New Jersey market, they can do it better out the gate in additional markets. So it's really, it's pretty cool that you guys focus it from such a different perspective, kind of taking a look back, challenging yourself, challenging your team to think differently and approach things differently, not just from the same point of view all the time.
We agree. We think it's pretty cool too, Alyssa.
Yeah. And Colby, you're pretty cool too. Cowen's been, such a great supporter of our events. You've been a keynote at events in past. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you guys for the conversation.